the Strategic Initiatives and Planning Committee to order. First what?
The inaugural.
First ever.
Our first meeting of the SIP committee. And can I please confirm that I have a quorum? I do, thank you very much. So we are scheduled to begin. This is a public session, 10:15 a.m. and expected to adjourn at approximately 12:15. The live stream of this meeting is available on to the public on youtube.com at the ABOR Live link. So this is our first attempt at really focusing on a full meeting on strategic issues. We have 4 or 5 of these that we have lined up over the course of the year. And I want to make very clear that my objective here is that these meetings are a little less structured than we have normally had in the past. Just create more of an open discussion about the topics that we have on the agenda. And we're starting this first meeting with the topic of university differentiation. Now we have been, and part of the reason for that is that we have been working on this and talking about this for the last, I don't know, 5 years, 8 years, 7 years. And so we have some ideas. We've made some movement in that arena already. I thought it was a good chance for us to perhaps not start from ground zero on something that is, frankly, very important to the state. I'm going to be doing a little bit of a level set. We have a lot of new regents. You got a lot of information before the meeting. But I think it's important that we have kind of a brief understanding of where we have been historically and where we find ourselves now. I also want to make very, very clear that this is a whiteboard discussion, that we are making no decisions in this committee. We are talking about things that may be somewhat uncomfortable, but I want everybody to remember that this is talking through things. This is throwing ideas on the wall and seeing what sticks, what doesn't stick, what the problems are, what the benefits are, giving the board a chance and the universities a chance to kind of walk through these somewhat gnarly issues. So the board book materials included a summary of the board's 3 strategic initiatives that have mostly related to the system design over the last 20 years. And each of those different initiatives was different, but each had elements relative to the system design to support the higher education needs of the state. And that's really what we're talking about today, is starting at that highest level, talking about what does the higher education landscape in the state look like, and what do we think it should or could look like, and how do we get to those places. Right now, and nationally and in Arizona, this higher education landscape continues to shift. And, you know, for example, with the growth of online degrees, the coming demographic cliff, where we have fewer high school students, you know, even eligible to attend higher education, and with kind of the continued challenges in making college accessible to the greater population. You know, obviously one of the shifts that has been most dramatic, in particular in the state of Arizona, has been, you know, the decrease in state funding per state student, especially since the Great Recession. And so our universities have all had to rely on growth and their entrepreneurial mindset to maintain tuition and enrollment to fully enable their teaching, research, and service missions. So while Arizonans and the general public may see differentiation within our 3 institutions, compared to other states, we don't have as diversified a portfolio of higher education opportunities as most other states. And so that's the rationale for having the discussion that we're going to have today. Now I'd kind of like to do a level set, and I'm going to do this in my own words, and somebody who wrote my talking points is going to cringe, I'm sure. But I wanted to, from my perspective, and I will say this is my perspective as an Arizona resident married to an Arizona native who actually attended one of the universities. So 40 years ago, the three universities were actually quite differentiated. U of A was effectively the Stanford of Arizona. If you were a student of any sort, you went to U of A. ASU at that time was nationally ranked as a party school. And then NAU was kind of that little sister on the hill that nobody really paid attention to, and it did its thing up there, but it was quiet and small and...
Forestry.
And what?
Forestry.
Forestry. And then 20 years ago, enter Michael Crow. And ASU begins to differentiate itself from the others. And, through its charter and the concept of the New American University, and has been extraordinarily successful at being consistent and dedicated to that charter. ASU is well-defined and very successful.
We're all robots.
We're all robots. There have been no bumps in the road, no.
Right.
But it really, ASU has done an extraordinary job of defining itself and staying true to that definition, that mission, and that charter. From my perspective, as ASU started to succeed, I think U of A got uncomfortable and felt like they perhaps needed to attempt to compete with ASU in ASU's sandbox. And I think in some ways lost some of its personality, some of its cachet, in an effort to compete with the mission, on the mission that ASU had assigned itself. And U of A has remained successful, has done incredible things, but I think could be even better at who it is and what it is, and what it provides to the state of Arizona in a differentiated way from ASU or NAU. 10 years ago, NAU kind of tried to begin to compete directly with ASU and U of A, specifically in the research arena and in the academic portfolio. Given where NAU is located, given its historical focus on student relationships, small classes, the personal touch that was NAU's pride and credo, this led to NAU kind of losing part of its personality in the attempt to compete in ASU's and U of A sandbox. And so what happened was we essentially ended up with slightly differentiated but almost the same higher education offering at all three public institutions in the state. And I'm not sure that that's ideal for the state of Arizona. So current status, jumping ahead, ASU well-defined, consistent with its charter and messaging. NAU has been on a new path for the last 2 years with President Cruz Rivera. We have much to do here, but the concepts are being researched and developed, and NAU is moving more towards a differentiated mission, a differentiated personality, differentiated academic programs, all of the things that help people make a decision between institution A, B, and C. U of A has done a great job in increasing its medical research, has done a great job in improving on its rankings, its status, its strategic planning. But I think what we need now is to figure out what is the ideal landscape of higher education for the state of Arizona, and how do all the pieces fit? What kind of conversations do we want to have with U of A about how we differentiate U of A? How do we define U of A? And again, all things on the table, no judgments. Is there value in having a more selective, elitely ranked university? Most other states have a very highly ranked university and a number of, other institutions. Arizona has 3 public institutions to choose from. So is there value in having, a university in the top 50? Is there and what ranking are we looking at? There was an article yesterday that came out that said the U.S. News and World Report rankings aren't as highly used by students as they are by board. But the article also didn't say that they were useless. They were used to find the right neighborhood, perhaps not the right address is the analogy they used. So what neighborhood do we want U of A to be found in? Pros and cons, impacts and considerations, geographic, financial, academic, political, other. I mean, there's a litany of things to be kind of talked about, discussed. And so what I'd like to do is open the discussion. We have a lot of really knowledgeable people on this board. Kind of open the discussion first with what do we see as the ideal higher education landscape in Arizona? What structure, what entities, what offerings, geography, the whole shebang. And I know it's a big question, but I think it's a good starting point, because I think that gives us the crust that we can then delve below. And university presidents everybody's, open to participate.
Got to break the ice.
There you go.
Yep. So, I mean, I think this topic for me starts with what problem are we trying to solve? And the design, the allocation, the system should be a reflection of what problem we're trying to solve. And so I think about what's our assignment. Think about the ones that are just going gangbusters. I mean, research is going gangbusters. Our solutions profile is going gangbusters. Our relevance to people's lives, our alignment with federal funding, et cetera, we're crushing it, we're doing great. Always more to do. $1 billion is in our line of sight for at least 2 of the institutions. NAU is almost doubled in the last couple of years. I mean, couldn't ask for more. Our alignment with workforce, engineers, moving, I mean, at velocity. Doctors, new plan. Nurses, new plan. Teachers academy, underfunded, but we have a tool. So I think we have game in those areas. I think the 2 things that the problems, and even problems is too strong of a word, but the 2 objectives that we should be focused on are attainment and quality. And I say that for a couple of reasons. As we all know, notwithstanding enormous efforts in a variety of ways, our in-state attainment is not keeping pace with our goals, much less even our pace of population growth. So volume is, I think, the macro challenge. And then second, informed by this material that we've just been handed around market research, we produce a better quality than I think is publicly perceived, and how much of that is marketing and how much of that is what's taking place in the classroom. There are dynamics there that I don't pretend to understand, but we should have a better value proposition than the evidence suggests, the market evidence suggests that we have. And I note, I mean, couldn't ask more for our honors colleges. Our honors colleges are fantastic. Our research is, the component parts that typically drive the value proposition seem to be in place, and yet there is a gap between the quality I think we're putting on the table and the way that this project is being perceived. And that's head scratcher for me, but I think a problem worth trying to solve. The attainment issue has a number of component parts. There's a demographic component, there's an economic component, there's a geographic component, there's an academic component. And we are moving in most of those areas. I mean, the distribution of campuses, all three campuses, particularly, increasingly NAU's new assignment, but both ASU, U of A have over the last couple of decades tried to move into a variety of distributed avenues. Obviously, online is a tool in that regard. But there are gaps. I mean, the west side of Maricopa County, Pima County, I think, has gaps. I mean, there are definitely gaps in our distribution. I think that's a little bit of a piece of it. I think the issue is sort of the demographic and economic gap. If you look at a slide that we've had, John has used it, I've used it in this room with the ASU Foundation a couple weeks ago. If you look at who's being served by our product, Pell is taking care of lower income Arizonans. And then self-pay takes off at about 120K. And the gap between, we are outperforming our high school demographics in every category except the middle class. And there are more middle class students who are coming out of our high schools with the capacity to perform for whom we are not finding avenues of access. So, my opinion, the attainment issue, the in-state attainment issue is the flashing red light. And it has two components. One, which we've talked a lot about, and our presidents are absolutely developing tools. How do we find those 700,000 or 800,000 Arizonans who have some college credits and don't have a degree? Strategy one. Strategy two is how do we produce more on-ramps for students in the middle class? That leads to promise. I don't mean to suggest that all roads lead to promise, although most roads lead to promise. So we've developed a tool for that, but it is an under-leveraged tool to be sure. The volume of institutional financial aid has been brilliantly done to advance our institutions in spite of lack of state support. But it's just not sustainable at that level. And we must find ways to relieve those dollars for other purposes. And so I'm trying to arrive with any ideas, but my thought in terms of what the most important focus is how do we build distribution structures and other means of access to the middle class students who either can't afford to come or don't know that we have tools that will work for them, and there is a failure of either marketing or systemic engagement. But that's, if you start with the proposition that in-state attainment is the issue, I think our focus should be, well, it should focus on many of these other things, disproportionately focused on the distribution of our assets in growing population areas, number one, and two is around the economic gap for the underserved middle-class students who have the intellectual and psychological gifts to perform and don't find their way to our gates. Now, that's not a unique diagnosis. Everybody in the country is having the same conversation. But I mean, I think that's the sweet spot of where we are underserving our duty to the state.
So where does differentiation fall
Well,
in that conversation?
That's kind of the interesting question. So are we, is the answer to in-state attainment more elite products? Maybe. I mean, I think the number was 1,400 students that leave us to go to an elite college someplace else in the country. Somebody probably has that number, but
One of the lowest numbers in the United States.
yeah. I mean, I was just going to say it's something we should go in after, but it is not a game changer.
Well, I mean, we should study it closely. It's not numerically transformative.
Yes. I think what is transformative are tools for families who have a family income of $70,000 to $130,000, who either don't have a counselor who tells them how to get here, or we don't have the marketing tools, or they don't fill out FAFSA, and we need legislation around FAFSA. Larry Penley today circulated an article. 3 more states have just passed legislation that ties the attainment of something, a driver's license or a high school degree, to filling out FAFSA. Variety of tools in that space, but that's the gap. The gap between the number of degrees we need in Arizona and the number we're producing is roughly 20,000, according to Jim Runts, 20,000 a year, 100,000 every 5 years. You just can't, at some point, you can't dig yourself out of that hole. And so I think, while we should probably, Madam Chair, talk about all the things you thoughtfully raised, that the sweet spot, the thing we need to talk about is how do we provide more service to middle-class families with smart, gifted students who aren't finding their way to us. All these things, a more elite product might be part of the mix. I don't know.
I don't
Worth
know if
talking
it is or
about.
not.
But I mean, I really think the issue is in-state volume.
Well, and the concomitant problem with that is that every student that we bring into the university system from in-state, we lose money on. So.
Correct. Correct. The business model argues against it.
So one thing that we now have that we didn't used to have with the Helios ASU Decision Theater on education down to every high school, which is available for everyone to use, is we have data and trends and analytical capability for the entire pipeline. And one thing that we probably ought to do before thinking about how to make these more substantial approaches to Arizona students is to understand that a lot better. So we have extremely low college going rates in certain high schools, for which remediation from the inside will never be possible soon enough to make a difference. And so one of the things that we need to do is there are probably certain things that the board could do as the governing body and as the constitutional entity relative to higher education attainment in terms of communications, like the thing that you mentioned on FAFSA, like other kinds of things. You don't have the authority to make it so, but there are ways to make things more structured for everyone. And so what we have, in my view, here is an extreme laissez-faire system in which we're not encouraging, enabling, empowering, or educating people to make these decisions, because everything is laissez-faire. And that laissez-faire to an extreme nets out this result. So I would suggest a systematic approach that we could take that center to look at and say, okay, how do we get more of these kids to, show up? We also need to understand it demographically. It is, we have to be careful not to overgeneralize. The biggest predictor for college attainment is the mother's education in the family. And so in our Hispanic mother-daughter program, which has been a powerful tool for us as we've moved to more than 30,000 Hispanic students at ASU and have been number 2 in the graduation of Hispanic students in the United States of all universities in the country for a long time, it is a struggle at the family level, at the education level. So we're not devoting sufficient system-level energy. It's more than marketing a particular pathway to going to ASU to a family. It's much more systematic than that. So we don't have Regents diplomas for Regents certification for counselors in the high schools. There's all kinds of things that we could be doing, and we need to, I think, take a very systematic, analytically driven approach on all of these things, because it's our belief, having more than 50,000 students from Arizona attending ASU here with us, it's cultural. And that's not to demean one culture from another. We don't have a culture that yet has college embedded in it as one of the options that many families think about. So it's bigger than money. It's culture.
In addition to sort of the cultural components that we need to address, and that are things that are within our direct control in terms of how do we figure out what types of products we need to provide and where across the state and targeted to whom, middle class, et cetera. We should not lose sight of the structural components that require us sort of working across sectors. And so the reality is that, yes, we are only 3 universities, and that from the outside, we may look very much alike. But we do have dozens of community colleges in this state, and many high schools that are very much interested in doing enrollment programs. And so how do we facilitate those pathways as a means to tap into more students, both adult learners and students coming right out of high school? That is something that we are focusing in on at NAU, because we know that in addition to perhaps strengthening our statewide footprint with additional sites or consolidation of sites or campuses, the numbers are in our community colleges and in our high schools, and somehow we have to tap into that more effectively. And that is I would just say a salient point of other states that have the more sort of diversified higher ed systems, either the City Universities of New York, which have community colleges, four-year colleges, and graduate schools within one system, or in California, where you have a strong California community college system, the CSU in the middle, and the UCs as the more elite.
So just to tag on to that, it's a systems level issue, and it's also cultural. So we have more students graduating from community college initiation points at ASU than we've ever had. Thousands and thousands more per year than we used to. It is an unbelievable, there's unbelievable resistance to that. So the community college, I just pulled up the Los Angeles Community College website, which I can find in just 2 seconds here, the button that then allows me to push a button and begin my transfer process to the University of California or the California State University system if I meet certain requirements. So there's no buttons like that in Arizona. You know, we've built relationships with hundreds of community colleges from ASU, all of the community colleges in Arizona. There is blatant competitive resistance to cooperation. And that's a board level issue in my view, because we're perceived to be the competitor. And so there isn't any competition. We're ready to take students when they want to come, ready to come, and so forth. But this goes to the structural point. We've never even gotten to the point where in Arizona you push a button for NAU, U of A, or ASU, and then your transcript goes in there and you pick the program that you want and you're admitted if you meet these requirements. And so we've done that case by case by case by case by case by case. In fact, we have an entire staff devoted to everything but that. There's no one from the community colleges even here at these meetings of the Board of Regents. There's no governing board for the community colleges in Arizona. It was dissolved. And so these are structural things that have a deep impact on this stuff also.
Regent Herbold?
I was reading can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
This morning in the Seattle Times, they cited the fact that in the state of Washington, it's one of only 3 states where there are more families that make over 200,000 than there are families that make less than 50,000, which is incredible in terms of demonstrating the wealth generation of that state. And the reason why is it's got a lot of big companies that are focused on core technologies. It's got a very healthy startup community. Arizona is dramatically different. We're primarily an agricultural state and a manufacturing state. For example, in the semiconductor business, we're really not in the semiconductor business. We're in the fab manufacturing business, which requires different kinds of resources than if you were having the headquarters of Intel here or the headquarters of some other large semiconductor company. I like the idea of coming back to Fred's question, which is what problem are we trying to solve? Is it really the middle income household that we're trying to serve better, given that we've done a fairly good job at the low level, or maybe we haven't? I don't know, but it would be terrific to grind away a bit at precisely what problem are we trying to solve.
Chair Manson, I think Regent Herbold has a very good point, and it relates to what Regent Duvall said very much in looking at what problem we're trying to solve. In a sense, I take a page from what President Crow has done at ASU with regard to his comments on place, it strikes me that we have to look both at Arizona as a whole, and then we have to look at the communities in Arizona if we're to answer the question that Regent Herbold has asked. So we really have to not only look at the state as a place, but Flagstaff as a place, this Phoenix metro area as a place, Tucson as a place, and then the areas outside these metropolitan areas that really have needs that are quite different and quite specialized as well. We know, for instance, that in terms of addressing one problem, we know that we have an educated labor force leakage from this state. We know after 5 to 10 years that a lot of young people leave the state of Arizona and go find jobs in Chicago and LA and San Francisco and other places like that. We know as well that the leakage problem of the state is much worse in Tucson and in Flagstaff, where the leakage is fairly significant in a matter of a few years, a year, 2 or 3, from the time of graduation from the University of Arizona or Northern Arizona University, because there are insufficient large opportunities for employment in either of those two communities. So if we were trying to address a problem beyond the one that Regent Duvall raised about getting a larger proportion of students who graduate from our high schools, including middle class students, into school, I think we have to ask what would drive economic prosperity even more across the state, and what would drive it specifically in Tucson and specifically in Flagstaff, which are quite different communities. And in looking at that economic prosperity, it really requires a modeling of what the potential is there. Regent Herbold is correct. We're not going to be a large manufacturing other than the fabs, but what we can focus on is the kind of technology, the kind of optics that the University of Arizona looks at, and certain industries that are related to our engineering specializations. We can drive those if we are quite deliberate in doing so. If we look at access, and you look at what President Cruz Rivera has done in Northern Arizona University with increasing access of students ranging from lower income families into the beginnings of the middle class, as well as what's been done at Arizona State University on the same issue. We're really addressing that sort of issue, which is so essential. We have taken on a challenge of working more closely with K through 12. That's hard, working with community colleges. I agree with President Crow. Unfortunately, given the structure of the state of Arizona and the lack of governing structures that cause collaboration, that's not likely to occur, and I don't expect it to occur. I hope it can occur at the high school level, where we do things that help to drive a career focus of students at an earlier stage and retain the kind of mathematics, language arts, and science courses that students are actually going to need to be successful in the longer run. Again, if I look at Maricopa or Pima County, if I look at Pima County, you have a very high proportion of low-income families, just like you do in Maricopa County. At this stage, given the tuition that we have at the University of Arizona, we're not likely to see those families see the University of Arizona as a solution to access. So if we're going to create access in that space in Pima County, then we have to look to either developing something new in Pima County, or we have to look at broadening the reach of Northern Arizona University into Pima County in order to meet the needs of the citizens there. I could go through more issues like that, but to me, if you look at what the place needs, meaning either this large rural area of Arizona, and unfortunately I'm calling some reasonably sized cities rural at this point, what Flagstaff needs, what Phoenix needs, and what Tucson needs, where the 3 large universities are, then one comes up with, I think, the beginnings of answers to what these universities ought to do. If you look, for instance, to agriculture, where this state has been a leader in agriculture, and you look at who has the kind of water resources to maintain that, Clearly, Yuma, with its access to the declining Colorado River, has access to the kind of water to do that. In a lot of our parts of the state, we have a very significantly declining groundwater, which either means that we give up agriculture unless we change, or we call on the university, the land-grant institution, University of Arizona, to really address more sustainable agriculture in order to assure that agriculture. Now, above 80%, perhaps 90% of the greens consumed in the winter in this country come from Arizona. Our agriculture is important. If one buys a box of Barilla pasta in the grocery store, it is Arizona pasta. It is Arizona wheat. So our role in agriculture is really significant to the food consumption of Americans and to the business interests of Italy, at least in durum wheat. So if we look, I think, to these outcomes, the way Regent Herbold has asked us to do, then we couple that in this three-dimensional matrix that I have in my head with a look at not one of the major three cities, but also then Tucson, Phoenix, and Flagstaff. I think, and Arizona, we begin to answer the question of what we should want from the three universities.
So let me ask a question related to, what we have depended on since the state funding has dropped has essentially been growth. So growth has been the mechanism for our growth of enrollment, has been the mechanism for achieving more Arizona students. ASU is in a major metropolitan area with ability to expand, already has, campuses in Mesa and campuses in the West Valley and a lot central Phoenix. So obviously has the ability to expand and has, in no pejorative way, a less kind of traditional campus feel than either U of A or NAU does. That's to its benefit in the ability to manage growth, kind of ad infinitum. Both NAU and U of A have more traditional college campus feels, relatively restrained geographic location on those main campuses. NAU, with the board's encouragement and Jose Luis's leadership, has moved towards how do we provide a more statewide, including, frankly, how do we provide a different product in Tucson. U of A, while it has some land and some ability to expand, it doesn't have that same unfettered ability that can be found in Phoenix. So if growth is not, and let's set the online discussion aside, but if immersion growth is not an ad infinitum solution on the main campuses of either U of A or NAU, I know NAU's plan is begun. What do we look at for U of A? And if we are looking at creating an environment that has a limitation on enrollment, and there are flagship universities all over the country that have enrollment limits on their main campuses. If we do that, that's a defining distinction. How do we manage that with the desire to enroll additional Arizona students? So is that NAU, U of A finds itself focused in a higher level, and this is kind of where the elite institution comes, and then those students in the Pima County area who don't qualify are then going to, NAU Pima County or NAU Tucson, or what does that, if those are theoretical options, what does that look like? Is that something that, U of A can sustain? So if the growth is limited, how does U of A manage limited growth in enrollment? How does NAU get past the desire of Pima County residents to attend U of A? I mean, they're not small issues. Regent Penland?
Regent Manson, I think you're on the right track with what you're addressing here. If you look at, we don't have any institution in the state that now claims to really look at itself as having only the most elite, highest performing high school students in the state. Now, and you see that in the numbers. You see it in the Flynn Scholars, for example. When I was a faculty member, ASU got maybe one Flynn Scholar, two, I don't know, Michael, I could be wrong about that.
Yeah.
But the lion's share went to the University of Arizona. And today, as a result of the different efforts of NAU and by what President Crow has done at Arizona State University, the Flynn Scholars are often more heavily found at Arizona State University than they are at certainly the other two universities. If you look at what has happened in Texas as a model, for example, UT Austin, for any of us who've been there, knows that it's in downtown Austin with all the problems that Austin now has with traffic and people and a whole set of other issues. It really is bound in a way that it's hard for it to grow in downtown Austin. And it recognized that it couldn't continue to grow. So it set this very artificial limit on what would happen from every high school in the state as to who got to go from that high school to UT Austin. That, in my impression, from going back and talking with relatives, is really increased even further the prestige of UT Austin. It may have even driven young people at high schools to work even harder. I don't know the answer to that. That's an empirical question for which I don't have the data. But certainly UT Austin has not suffered one bit from having set a limit on its growth and having focused on being as elite as it can be in the state of Texas. So there's a direction that can be taken there that I'm not sure is deleterious to an individual university if UT Austin can be used metaphorically to look at others.
So I think I've been pretty consistent about this when we talk about attainment. If we're really looking at this in the long term, 20-year horizon, I would put as many resources as possible in early childhood education because we know the data is very clear. If you don't have a certain vocabulary by a certain age, 4 or 5, then you can't, it doesn't mean you can't be successful academically, it's just tougher. So I think, we struggle with getting funding for the K-12 system here. We need to start even earlier than that. Moreover, we don't get great funding for the universities. So that's a place I would start looking out over a horizon of 20 years. And I think there are a few examples of where that's been successful. In terms of this discussion about differentiation, when I first arrived, I was asked, are you going to grow the university? I go, well, we're like UT. We've got more than 40 acres, but we don't have a lot of land. So I said, no, I think, and then I realized if you don't grow, you can't get the tuition revenue to run the university, which we're at sort of break even every year. Every year I've been here, we made some money, we invested some money, we had a little bit left over. And so I think this idea of differentiation is one, the key would be the balance of being elite without being elitist. I think there's the distinction there. We think we're elite in many different areas at our university. When I arrived, we were the AAU land grant university with not one but two medical schools. Now, we have two AAU universities. We both have medical schools, so I do believe.
We're building 5 medical schools.
Was that? Good. We may be able to get the physician and nursing shortage if we increase fivefold. And we, of course, continue to say we want to double ours. But I think it would be antithetical to our land grant mission to become more restrictive. Now, one of the things that, there's a lot of pride in Southern Arizona about, we've spent a lot of time in our local school systems embedding counselors, trying to recruit students from particularly the South Side to stay at home and go to the U of A. When you say, well, the Access University is at NAU, go, well, I can't, I don't have the resources to go there, come back home and all this stuff. So a solution would be having NAU in Tucson. But again, it gets back to the issue of what problem are we trying to solve. Even through the pandemic, we've all grown between 3% and 4% every year. So students are still choosing our 3 universities to come. And then the other real fine point on this, I think Texas is a good example. I think Texas A&M would quibble with the idea that UT is the flagship. I think they would say we've got 2 flags here in Texas.
Yes, they would.
And then, of
Just
course,
like Arizona.
yeah, like Arizona. The one that I look at most, if you're doing a case study on this, is Florida. And there was a clear strategic choice made on funding the University of Florida to be the flagship university of the state, and to go after being a top 5, and now I think they're on the pathway to be a top 3 public university and in the top 25 or 30 overall universities. But that required, so if we said, okay, I buy into this thing, we'll have NAU to take care of our local students, and we'll raise the standards to get into the U of A, and we'll actually shrink the number of students. How are we going to make payroll? Because unless the state or somebody's going to invest in the university, it's not sustainable. It's barely sustainable doing what we do now, which is a 60-40 split between in-state and out-of-state students. The biggest net tuition student you can get, and Michael's got reams of data, but generally speaking, is the 2.5 out-of-state student, because they pay full.
No merit aid, right?
There's no merit aid. They don't qualify for need-based aid. And so, we're really happy. We've got the largest incoming class we've ever had, the most accomplished, the most diverse. We're growing. We've had more transfer students this year than ever. And I will say, Lee Lambert did an incredible job at Pima Community College. It's held up as one of the top 3 or 4 community colleges in the country. And we've got good relationships with them. The problem is making the jump over from a 2-year, and a lot of times it's student choice, but to a 4-year university. But going back to that issue of investment in, if we said, okay, we're going to do all that, and we're going to, instead of having 53,000 students, we want to go on a progression to have, 40,000 students max. Then how do we pay all the professors and all the staff that are now working overtime just to keep up with the 53,000 we've got? That's a big issue.
So 2 data points on that. I was just looking up while Bobby was talking. So in the 2024 budget passed by the Texas legislature, $3 billion is allocated to the University of Texas alone, to the system. They have 243,000 students at the campuses in the University of Texas system. That's $12,234 of direct state investment per student. So we have less than half that per student. That's not the only state investment. That's just the general budget. And so in the People's Republic of Texas, there is a deep commitment to higher education. In the Republic of Arizona, there isn't. And one of the things that I've been arguing for, and I think the board needs to take this on as a multi-year effort, is that there's only one voice that can drive that forward. That is the board itself. The governors come and go. The board is supposed to be, and it is largely, an apolitical body appointed by political officers, and then it comes together on a certain kind of schedule. And so we heard about the state of Washington from Regent Herbold, and the fact that there's more individuals making more than $200,000 than individuals making $50,000 or less. Some of the special assignments that the board is giving me are related to figuring out what we might do as a state to change our economy and so forth and so on. We have to find a way, and the board is configured right now of pragmatic, politically appointed individuals. We have to find a way to change this investment argument also. We can't just assume the only way we can do this is to move forward on our own. Because, as Regent Duval just said earlier in his opening comments, there is a limit to that. Unless, and we've thought about this, where you just change the scale of everything and you start generating billions and billions and billions of dollars of revenue on a margin basis that allow you then to self-fund everything that you're doing. But then that comes with, to some extent, even what you're talking about relative to our maneuvering versus our two sisters and their evolution, it then negatively impacts the outcome of everything in some ways. So I think taking a look at what the People's Republic of Texas is able to do. And just to be clear, the University of Texas is one of 5 university systems. So if you look at their detailed numbers, they're spending, they have 4 times the number of people. I think they're spending 12 times the amount of money. And so in a state that is, at least based on the trial going on right now in the Texas Senate, seems conservative.
I don't know what the chart says about A&M, but I know this year from the legislature, they got an incremental $1 billion. $1 billion. How much did we all get together? Maybe 100 million? I don't know. That's what we got. And we have the prospect of getting 0 new incremental dollars next year. A&M in Texas, and then it's, as Michael says, there's North Texas, there's Texas Tech, there's University of Houston.
Texas State also, all systems.
Multiple campuses.
So I'm going to go with President Cruz Rivera, then Regent Duval, and Regent Penley.
To the question of, in the case of NAU and its Flagstaff campus, if we were not, in the absence of state dollars, it's really growth, as has been said, and given where we are geographically, it's statewide growth. So it's trying to create new products that will bring in students that are not currently participating in higher ed, that will then allow us to not only serve them well, but generate the revenues that will allow us to sustain the entire mission of Flagstaff plus the statewide footprint. I think it's been said before, but in the absence of growth, period, right, the only way that we can sustain our operations is through changes to the enrollment mix. And Bobby suggested the 2.5 out-of-state, GPA out-of-state student as being a way to maintain the operations. Of course, what this does is it displaces Arizona students. And so from the perspective of the value proposition we're discussing for the state, I think that's a data point that we talk about, but it's perhaps not ingrained in everybody's mind. I remember when in California, when we were heavily impacted in California, now the state is trying to invest more and keeping more of its students. We had to always be doing the calculus of how many out-of-state and international students do I need to admit one more Southern Californian in that case. And it would be really detrimental to the state, given the deficit we already have in producing degrees, if the universities were required to shift those in-state and out-of-state balances even more towards out-of-state.
I was curious, the retention rate of a student who is an Arizona resident, goes to an Arizona university to the state and working in the state is what versus an out-of-state student who comes to an Arizona university, gets a degree, do they stay,
So for us,
staying in
it's
state?
75 in-state, about 60 out-of-state. It's very high in both cases. We're just underproducing.
So
Factors
so
in.
we collect and publish that data, and it's, yeah, and it does vary by university, but I think the out-of-states retain it much lower than 60%. I think it's around a quarter.
Yeah, it's 30 to 25.
Yeah, we're looking at it over the person's lifetime. So remember, we have the tax data of who comes.
Yeah,
and
We're
goes.
looking at the
Yes,
same data
President,
we
we're
did
looking
at
at the same
DES,
data.
and we've looked for 20 years. And
Over the person's entire life. They leave and then come back.
Yeah, we're tracking it through about 20, 25 years. We can, let's make sure we're using the same
That
data.
everybody's
but
on the
it's-
same definition.
But for residents, we see, as Regent Penley mentioned, it's pretty steady for the first 5 years and then a
Then
drop.
they have to leave when they hit middle management, because there's no business headquarters, yeah, regional headquarters kind of stuff here. Okay.
So I do have the data of the question that Bobby said about Texas A&M. So their state budget allocation last year between the 2023 budget and the 2024 budget was increased by 58%, by $820 million to $2.243 billion. So it puts them also at more than $13,000 per student per year from state investment.
And that's just the investment. If they want to build a building, they just go to the PUF fund, Permanent University Fund.
That's the appropriation. I factored out the higher education fund, which was not a huge part of their budget. But
I'm sure.
Yes,
Can I talk?
yes.
Thank you. So, thank you for having this discussion. This is, I think, really awesome, and thank you, Regent Duval, for kind of framing it in the what problems are we trying to solve. I think that was very, very useful. I think we all can acknowledge we're not Texas and we're not Florida, and those two states have done amazing things over the last 2 decades. 20 years ago, Florida had the exact same attainment statistics that we did. And now they've hit national averages. After lots and lots of investment, they've reached the national average. We're 25% below national averages. So we do have a lot of assets in Arizona. We're the most innovative state in the country, as we're awarded and told year after year after year after year. And so we're going to have to do some things without the resources that other states have. That's just where we are. And so I just a little concerned about the depression that I feel seeping into this conversation, the fatalism. And so to try to attack that a little bit, the two problems I heard defined were, one, our lack of college going, our just our base attainment rates, and the lack of education that's coming out of our K-12 university system, pre-K-12 system, that we need to attack that. The other problem I heard is I don't want to say the stagnation, because I think the economy in Arizona has grown and is modernized, and we've seen a little bit of a closing of the gap between the Arizona economy and the national economy over the last 5 years. I think that is at high risk to reverse if we can't solve the attainment problem on the other side. And so if we look at those two problems, how do we continue the expansion of the Arizona economy, the continued modernization? President Crow brought up the education of the mother. The latest data I saw on that is we're in the bottom 7 states in the percentage of births to a mother with a 4-year degree. And we're grouped with states that are very rural and very population small. That's not the right phrase, but you know what I mean.
Oh, we got you.
Yeah, they're rural, they're agrarian, and fairly small populations, where we've become more of a metro center, a metro state, less agrarian, and much larger. I mean, it's Alaska and West Virginia and other states like that.
Don't forget Mississippi, we're always at the top.
Mississippi's always, I was not going to say Mississippi, but yeah, they're in there too. So we do face some cultural issues on that front where our economy is trying to modernize, but we still have these cultural issues that kind of shackle on what we can do. And so as we talk about product mix or differentiation, or however you want to say it, understanding our resource limitations, are there organizational limitations in our own universities and the types of products we're offering that are contributing to either of those issues? Are there things that we can do to catalyze, with our universities, catalyze more business investment, more headquarter type investment? And that's when I think we get into the conversation around, and I don't like the word elite either, but increasing our national branding around our educational products that might attract that type of business investment. Are there things we can do in terms of geographic or pricing or other attainment or access questions? Are there things we can do in partnership with the community colleges that we haven't done to advance on those two problems? And I have every confidence that we can find those things and attack them. Regent Penley.
I'll say it. Regent Duval and then Regent Penley.
Since John very skillfully has gotten us on a more positive and optimistic track, my comments, which were going to be to pile on the predicament financially, I think I will withdraw my statement.
I have an optimistic comment.
All right, Regent Penley.
All right. No, I agree with Executive Director Arnold. I think we have to look at this in an optimistic way and not a negative way. And to me, focusing on just growth is really an error on our part. But I think what we have to focus on is student mix, brand, and areas of excellence. And if we combine those, then we can drive a revenue based on that combination. So if I look, for instance, to Arizona State University, sitting here in the Phoenix metropolitan area, with one of the largest, or the largest, tell me, Michael, engineering schools in the country.
The business school also.
Okay, and you look at that engineering program, you look at the fact that in semiconductors, I'm not even going to stop. Yes, with fabs, but also with the potential to do so much more, especially with the engineering programs that we have here. You have an ability to think about brand, areas of excellence, and mix of students, because then you can attract higher paying students. And we have to focus on revenue, of course, because we are in Arizona. We can attract students who are going to want to come here because of that. If you look at NAU and you look at the Colorado Plateau, distinctive environment in the world, and you think about the forestry, the forests that exist in northern Arizona, which, yes, they're in the Colorado Plateau, but there are also other areas of the world that have forests that sit in relatively dry areas with the kind of diseases and infections and other things that the forests get in northern Arizona. If you look at what's being done in infectious disease at Northern Arizona University, you have the capacity to think about this mix of students that you attract coupled with the brand and these areas of excellence. But one has to be, as a president, willing to drive money into those areas of excellence, to raise them along with the kind of marketing effort to do that. If I look at the University of Arizona and I look at Fort Huachuca, the other Air Force entities that exist in Pima County and the Tucson area, and I think about defense spending, and I tend to follow the money. This is just what I've learned over the years, follow the money. And I look at what that means in terms of where President Robbins should be investing additional resources from his office in order to really raise the prestige of those areas and increase the mix of students who come from California, New York, and outside the country because of that. If I look at what can be done in sustainable agriculture, we're not the only place that's having groundwater problems. The New York Times has made that clear, not only here in the United States, and the satellite images that are available now from one of the new professors at Arizona State University show clearly the drought problems that are worldwide. So sustainable agriculture in relatively drought-infected areas is a reality. So is that a capacity to move forward and invest more money and resources from the president's office? I think so, and attract students from other parts of the world and other states that face those same issues here at their homes as we do here in Arizona. So I think one has to think optimistically, as Executive Director Arnold has suggested. How do I take advantage of the place that I have, the areas of excellence that I can build on, and the kind of brand I should be built to alter the mix of students and raise the revenue of the university?
Regent Zaragoza, I really like those points. Thank you.
Chair Manson, thank you. Regent Penley, I want to add on to your comments. I do believe that you have a lot of wisdom in terms of focusing on the strengths of our universities as opposed to whatever shortcomings we might have, because at the end of the day, some of those are outside of university control. We can ask the state legislature for funds, but they are the ones who will decide at the end of the day what funds to give us. And I would like to encourage you, President Robbins, if you should decide to pursue this route of striving to make the University of Arizona a more elite institution, make sure to have a safety net under the tightrope as you walk across the canyon. You know, make sure to work with President Crow, President Cruz Rivera to address the needs of students who might not fit that criteria, and to, I guess, provide the opportunities that maybe might not be afforded at the University of Arizona.
Thank you.
Great.
Regent Duval?
So this really is about follow the money. I mean, I think Regent Penley got it right. And I reflect back, John can probably tell you the dates, but 70s, 80s, late 80s, we had an enrollment-based state partnership. And what the state got was higher in-state enrollment, because that's what they invested in. That was the market incentive. That was the assignment. With the change of that relationship and the loss of that funding formula, the universities have done the rational thing, responding to the market forces, which is that they've very successfully pushed out-of-state enrollment, resulting in almost all of our growth occurring in out-of-state enrollment. It's a painful choice, but it is the rational choice. And I guess I'm sitting here thinking, if you talk about a system design based upon, to John's point, you got to play the cards you're dealt and deal with the reality that we have. Are we comfortable with a strategic choice to find every possible way to accelerate our recruitment of out-of-state students to educate students from other states in order to continue to create the margins, in order to make a marginal difference in making a marginal investment as best we can in in-state students in order to move the Arizona number? And then try and keep those out-of-state students here as best we can in whatever role we can play by helping to redesign new economic and growth and the recruitment of new businesses and a startup economy, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I don't think that's the optimal set of choices for us. I'm reminded, I mean, Jose Luis and I have had this conversation. I know Michael, as he tends to be, is probably a part of it, is that California faced this 7 or 8 years ago, and the governor called in the chancellor at the time, our former governor Napolitano, and he said, look, I don't like the direction this is going. Too many out-of-state students, not enough California students. And so I'm going to tie the state investment to your increasing the enrollment of California students.
And limiting the tuition increase.
And limiting the tuition increase. That's a rational choice. That's responding to the state assignment. But the state assignment now.
He lost.
What?
The governor was not successful in the model that he wanted.
Right, marginally, but yeah, not to the extent that they committed. Is, you know, to accept these realities, and if we accept these realities, then we should figure, I mean, and I think probably we are doing this, the enrollment people are hearing can tell us, but, because we're doing pretty well at out-of-state enrollment, but maybe we just hit the gas on out-of-state enrollment as best we can, and we accept more out-of-state students in order to create a margin, in order to do what we can to improve the in-state attainment rate. That may be the reality. Probably not one that's consistent with our fiduciary reality, fiduciary duties, but it may be the financial reality of how we subsist.
It's in other live free or die states like Arizona, New Hampshire in particular, and then in a liberal live free or die state called Vermont, the model is that model. Colorado at its quote unquote fully functional research grade universities has the same model also for the same reasons. And so one could look at it as, however, more than just a financial goal. It would be a recruitment goal. It would be an economic development goal. It would be, partnering with companies. This is what we do, in terms of working with companies and so forth and so on. So it's more than just the utilitarian outcome. Whereas in Vermont and New Hampshire, it's only the utilitarian outcome. That is, they just want the university financed by something other than taxpayers, which is fine. They're very attractive places, very successful universities, and they attract people to those universities, and they have minimal public investment. We have our public investment is substantially higher than even those states, even as a percentage. And so we're sort of a hybrid of all of this. It would be that our goals need to be more clearly stated. So let's not argue over how many stay. Let's get more to stay. I would say we have to be cautious about narrowing the goals to too utilitarian of an objective and have these broader social outcome and economic outcome objectives, while at the same time trying to make the case for public investment for Arizonans. And so my own view is that while we fought that fight for a long time, we've never actually been defeated. We just get discouraged. I'd rather be defeated. Yes, exactly.
Well, and, there's nothing to say that you can't, and I think other states do this, is that you have, one particular university that is the kind of highly ranked, draws people's attention to the state, and everybody, from whatever other state, when they look at Colorado, the first thing that comes up as their highest ranked university is University of Colorado Boulder. There's no question. And so it draws people to the state. Whether or not those out-of-state students can get into Boulder is a different question. I would suspect that their ratio of staying is probably higher because there's more industry in Colorado than there is right now in Arizona. But, if we're going to pursue this, out-of-state students to subsidize and make whatever improvements we can in the Arizona while fighting the longer cultural battle. Maybe that's the two-part strategy that, once we get them here, how do we make them stay?
Yeah.
What is it that we can provide to them? And it may be that when you hit, as right now, if it's 60% in-state and 40% out-of-state, when those numbers flip, you may gain the attention of the legislature, which says, well, why are you doing that? I said, well, because this is how we make the money work. And that then is an impetus for them to look at it differently. But I think at the rate that we are under-providing for workforce right now, if we can bring students in and get them to stay, at the same time trying to address the cultural issues of even going to higher education, at some point those two plans cross.
So among the states that have extremely low investments per $1,000 of personal income per state, at the bottom is New Hampshire at $1.50, followed by Pennsylvania, and I want to come back to Pennsylvania because I think it's a very relevant model for us, followed by Arizona at $3, where it was at $15 per thousand for 5 decades. 5 decades. Then Colorado at $3 also. Just looking at those 4 states, the state that has the complexity that we have is Pennsylvania, or the complexity that we will have. So if you say in the model what you're talking about, the University of Arizona becomes the University of Pennsylvania. No, we're Penn State, they're Penn. I'm not looking at all the literalness of this, but what I'm saying is, and then the third system that they have is the broader, and I think they call it the Pennsylvania State System or something like that.
PASHE.
Yeah, PASHE. And so they have this model there, operating in a larger state than Arizona, with a very minimal investment. Now, they allow Penn State to operate as a non-GASB institution. You know, it's I don't know if Morgan is here.
Yes, he's back over
What
here.
do they call it? What's the other accounting system? FASB. So their public investment is so low, and their model is so different. And so I think there are models that are out there that we could take a look at. Because I don't see us going to, you know, the high states, which are just to be clear, $9 per $1,000 of income. New Mexico, Wyoming, Hawaii, Alabama, North Carolina, Mississippi, particularly Mississippi and Alabama we're playing catch-up baseball here. We've got to get these universities to move forward. So I just hope that we spend some time looking at these other models really, really carefully.
You're going to see a huge demand at University of Colorado due to the Prime effect.
They changed their name.
Prime University.
The president has to change his name.
He refers to himself as
Prime is recruiting
Chancellor Prime.
Yeah, he's Chancellor Prime now, Phil Prime.
That clip will be a hard one.
President Cruz Rivera had a comment, and then I'm going to go to Andrew.
Sure. Well, the comment I had, I think, Regent Manson, you have touched upon, which is if we were going to go after a more of an out-of-state financing model, clearly there can be differentiation among the three universities. NAU is, while we have representation right now in our incoming class from 52 states and territories, I don't know what's going on with Delaware, and 85 countries, the reality is that most of our enrollment is Arizona residents, and that's what we want it to be. And we want to not only be in Flagstaff, we want to be wherever we need to be to serve the people of Arizona. So if in determining what the right balance is of in-state versus out-of-state at each of the three universities, and when that convergence point happens, in determining what that would look like, I would hope that we can figure out some internal ways to finance the resident focus of NAU, right? So
Most
we,
of our students are Arizona also.
right.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective is that that's part of the differentiation, is that we don't necessarily have the same strategy at all three institutions.
So because of the gigantic universal nature of ASU, I would like them to be taxed and the proceeds to be progressively allocated towards the People's University, NAU.
Look at the face.
We just have to hit our own revenue numbers first.
Andrew?
So I was going to offer something that was in some of the board materials, just to John's comment about trying to put a positive tone on the discussion, and also to address what Regent Duvall mentioned about sort of what's the problem we're trying to solve. And it occurred to me when putting together some of these materials, just to be honest, that actually I'm not sure if the board realized how good the board's promise is as what is it we're doing. And so it's in there, and if you don't mind, I'm going to read it, because I think it tells you what it is you're trying to solve and the priorities that are in there, which is to increase post-secondary access and attainment for Arizona students, to seek solutions for societal challenges, and to do both while increasing quality, affordability, and efficiency. Delivering on its promise requires success in addressing all of those elements, as well as how and where they're provided across the portfolio of institutions in the system. And it turns out that the three things on the promise, which are these affordability, access, and quality, for want of a better word, it's really hard to optimize those in any one institution. And right now what we're doing is optimizing them within three quite complex enterprise institutions, right? And so I would suggest that if you take some of the elements of this conversation, plus the idea that this is an innovative state, and the idea that there is competition out there that has shown that there are markets we're not satisfying, you could have a lot of fun designing and finding markets for what it is either the current or new institutions could go after. So for example, Grand Canyon is definitely selling something that's not that different to what a lot of what we do.
I don't agree with that. So
It's actually a little bit more expensive. Although there's other money
premise
there.
that it's not much different than what we do, I mean, that's absurd.
We'll get to that. But it's playing in our market. And so there was something we weren't doing that they're clearly able to do. there's probably other markets. We have to find out what they are. Is it the middle income? Is it lower income? Is it high-performing students? Is it students who are B's and C's who don't think they can get in? Whatever the combination, there are markets out there, and it would be, I think, quite an exciting enterprise to think, what are those? And what could we design either within the current universities or in addition to the current universities that could creatively and innovatively go after those, because Arizona has the attributes that John was mentioning earlier.
Yes.
You know, it begs the question, and this is breaking some eggs, I get it, but is the state advantaged and our institutions not disadvantaged if we found and invited other providers to come to the state? I mean, we're in the attainment business. Now, our duty is to make sure our institutions are all strong, but we're in the attainment business. And Grand Canyon, you know, is contributing to that, notwithstanding other issues, but they are absolutely contributing to that. We've approached this as how can our institutions meet the objective of the solution we're trying to reach, or the problem we're trying to solve? Or are there institutions that provide certain things, certain degrees, cultural imperatives, et cetera, for which there is market share, and they already do it? They already have a brand, they already know how to do it. I mean, should we be thinking beyond the existing institutional structure to say, where's a gap for which we could possibly fill it, but for which somebody's already built to fill it?
This is a discussion that's going on in Miami right now. They think University of Miami, they need more universities in the greater Miami because it's blowing up, and they just don't see the demand being met by University of Miami, FAU, or FIU.
I think before inviting other universities into our turf, I think we have a lot of opportunity with our community colleges. I know that we have not perhaps been successful in the past. It's a very tough nut to crack. They're all independently governed. But our experience at NAU over the last year with the Arizona Attainment Alliance shows that there's a lot that can be done, and there's a willingness to collaborate. They serve 180,000 students. Probably it's more than that, but 280,000 students. Perhaps the outcomes are not where we would want them to be. Perhaps the program portfolios need to be adjusted. That is true of every university and community college in the country. But I think there's a lot to be said about our ability to work more closely with them. And so I think that they would be better partners in the short term than what we're seeing from others that are coming in uninvited right now.
Regent Herbold and then Regent Mata.
I think Larry, Regent Penley, put his finger on a core foundational piece here. No matter what our strategy is, we're going to need money, all right? And in fact, what we'd like is incremental money. And let's face it, there are limited ways to get the money. Increase out-of-state students, the national government, foundations, alumni, and our three universities have gone after those pretty aggressively. But no matter what your strategy is, living with a partner, namely the legislature, which thinks it's a good result to give us, $40 million on a one-time basis and it disappears next year, that's no fun. That's not the world one likes to live in, hand to mouth. So fundamentally, we have a funding issue that is right at core of no matter what our strategy is. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And that's why over time, our presidents have gone the route of more and more out-of-state students to the extent that they can. And in case of ASU, they're doing a marvelous job internationally in terms of students that also help us out financially. But the partner that we have in the legislature has been completely faulty and unreliable, and we need to face that. End of story.
Thank you. Regent Mata?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I just want to follow what Regent Penley has said and to mention where to follow the money. And one of the link that you should all look at is the National Defense Act, where money is given to support education as well and research. This is another market segment that we have not tapped in depth. I know ASU is working hard with other areas in the DoD, and online has been a very is the way a lot of the military are doing as well, but also civilians that are in the community. And if we also tap into the prime big contractors, because they are the one that gets the billions of dollars, they have the capacity to bring also academia, as well as this military bases. As you mentioned, Regent Penley, we have Fort Huachuca. But I hope that everybody knows that Fort Huachuca have an elementary school and a middle school that we can always look at because they go to our high school. However, they can transfer to another military base because they PCS. But when they PCS, they also, when they finish high school, they could be also out of state students that can come back to us. I just want to mention all this because there's a lot of brainstorming of what other segment, what other market do we have? And I think that if we look at the National Defense Act and we dig a little bit more, can we follow that money? There is so much to do at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, at Luke Air Force Base, Fort Huachuca, and many other bases that we don't talk about that are small branches in the state of Arizona. There is a component of the military area, and I think that this is another way, just to add, since we are brainstorming of how can we, tap into other areas that are not being really looked into that. That was my comment to follow with, and there's other things that I would like to bring to the table later on, but I'm still doing some research about that. I hope this, this just brings some diverse thinking on always looking at where can we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Penley?
One other comment, thank you, Regent Manson, is, and I can't look at Chief Financial Officer Olson quite as easily as I can the other two of you, along with the presidents, but. It's a good day for you. Hey, Morgan,
Or a
it's
good
really
day for
great
you.
But what we know is that the budgetary system of the three universities must rely upon deployable funds at the top level to drive these institutions forward. And unless there's a budgetary system in place that leaves the three presidents with funds that can be deployed for strategic initiatives, then we cannot do what I tried to say earlier and what Regent Mata and Regent Herbold were endorsing. So we must create really healthy budgetary systems to do that. So I just want to link the internal budgeting system back to this issue, because if we're going to have strategic initiatives that are so important to drive these universities forward, we've got to have the money to do that internally, along with following the money.
Okay, so I actually want to go down the rabbit hole of the topic you brought up, which is if we were to shift focus, and let's just, given that we've been talking a little bit about U of A specifically, if we were to shift focus at U of A and have them become more out-of-state, more international, so whether it goes 60-40, whether it goes to 50-50, whether it flips 40-60, I'm curious as to, does that create, how do we do that, first of all? Do we need to increase the profile of U of A in terms of rankings to draw those people in? Do we already have the applications that, we could access for those populations? What's the economic impact for U of A in terms of that kind of switch? I mean, I'm curious.
Yeah, we're doing it already. I mean, we're going zip code by zip code. The fastest growing high school age county is in Frisco, Texas, just north of Dallas. And we're pouring resources in, and the number of students coming from Texas, we always get a good flow from California. But Texas, now Washington, to Regent Herbol's point, that's another hot spot for recruiting. That's the second, now surpassed, I think Illinois is our second largest out-of-state population. And it's targeted to high schools by zip codes where we know there's growing numbers of high school students.
So do we, based on current admission standards, so we don't differentiate currently between admission standards between out-of-state and in-state students, correct? So based on current admission standards, do we have applicants that could fulfill, what kind of applicant numbers do we have that could fulfill a shift to, and I'm looking at Casey because she's sitting back here, that could fulfill that kind of shift? I mean, does it exist? Again, this is no decisions, I'm just curious.
Yeah. I don't know if this is on.
And Casey can't get the
I
microphone.
know.
Speaking it will work.
Hello? Is it on? No. Okay, I'll talk loud. The applications continue to grow every year, so we're continuing to grow that base. I think one of our, and we're already at about 50-50 right now.
Okay.
The class that came in this year, we're a little heavier on air residents, but that was a huge focus that we had with Arizona Promise and all of that. So, but we, as an overall, undergraduates are pretty close to 50-50 now. So I think one of our hardest challenges is just the space that we have on campus for students to live, the actual dorm space that we have for students. If we cut back on our number of residents that are actually coming to us and really growing that non-resident, we can balance that out. But I think it's, anything's possible. It would probably cost still a little more money than what we're putting out there now as you continue to build the brand and bring in those students from out of state that maybe hadn't thought of us before. So we still need to build that base a little bit more as we are continuing to do, but it would still take resources.
I just want to add, everyone's aware of the complexity, but admissions of out-of-state students and international students is a function of a complex set of issues, including price.
Right.
And so we have been held back until just recently at accelerating our market price for international students for lots of complex reasons. All of the institutions are below the market price for international students, particularly of certain institutions. We're estimating, I just checked with Kent, we had 80,000 applications for our first year full-time on-campus freshman class this year. That finished, we'll have 85,000 or more in the year going forward. Closing on those people and getting the right class and configuring the class. So, we don't have an application problem. What we have is a closing problem from our perspective. And the closing problem is this complex set of issues that we have to go through, including housing and locations and chicken and egg problems on our West Valley campus, on our Polytechnic campus, and so forth and so on. So the point I'm bringing up is just that there's many, many more things to it than just,
Do you have the applications? Yeah.
University of Arizona and ASU, probably even NAU, we have no application issues. There's no lack of desire to look at these schools or to be a part of these schools. It's different than that. What we lack is, and you said it earlier, what we lack is the demand taking our resources for the in-state students limits our utility to generate the revenue and the enrollment from the non-in-state students. And so we're in somewhat of a financial quandary over those points. And so now that we have slightly more freedom in our tuition setting process, we have the multi-year agreement, we're keeping the in-state tuition low. I mean, there's a huge degree of freedom now that we have. And we're working on this in very, very vigorous ways, but it is also related to price, and then price is a function of brand. Brand is a function of perceived exclusivity or perceived utility. And so we think you can get a huge distance by advancing both brand and utility indexes. And so our problem is more in execution. I don't know if Provost Gonzalez or Vice President Hopkins wants to comment on that, just in this notion of attracting these students from a revenue perspective.
These are issues that we look at closely, and just in the last year, as the broader landscape is changing for all universities around how competitive other universities are being, we saw a different type of behavior in our ability to close, and it's very kind of month-to-month responsiveness is needed, so that we can understand how to maintain the levels that we have, and also to make sure that we're fighting against, what you mentioned in terms of the headwinds. So it's very, very complicated.
And I would just add, the tie that you talked about earlier, the demographic, Cliff. All three public universities here have strong out-of-state market presence. But we are competing against other public universities who are trying to increase their non-resident enrollment. So what President Crow and Provost Gonzalez have shared is application volumes have increased, admit volumes have increased. The competitive nature of finding the socioeconomically capable student to lead places, as President Robbins said, like California, Texas, Washington. I think if we all look at our competitor set, if we look at California students, they're looking at Arizona. They're looking at the University of Arizona, they're looking at ASU, and they're looking at NAU. So in a way, we're competing against each other to try and bring that type of student, but we're also competing against Big 12 institutions, Big 10 institutions, who are also trying to increase their non-resident enrollment. And I appreciate what Regent Herbold said earlier about international. President Crow had a charge when I arrived in 2009 to increase our international enrollment because it was his vision as a new American university to be as diverse and inclusive as possible. And so we've moved that enrollment from about 3,800 to 15,000. But even in the international market, the competition is getting higher and higher, and it's not just U.S. universities. It's Australia, it's the U.K. So it's a complicated set of issues, and we've only talked about undergraduate enrollment in this dialogue.
And one other data point from Dan Dillon, just on this issue of incoming GPA and the broadening of the GPA allowances for NAU, which could be very, very powerful. Just comment on some of the numbers that you indicated.
Thank you. Yeah, so John, you may remember in 2019, they asked us to do some research on Project Attainment, and we conducted research amongst prospective students, high school students and their parents, and what we found was 86% of high school students in the state and 89% of parents had aspirations of going to a 2-year or 4-year college after graduating, and when we asked them what they believed were the requirements, 2/3 of them, both parents and students, believed that they were on track of meeting the 16 course requirements, the 2.5 GPA, and in fact only 25% of them actually were. So when they graduated, they weren't prepared to be admitted into a state university based on our requirement.
Thank you, K-12.
President Robbins.
So Regent Penley, I can't see Casey behind me. When I used to operate, I had a bicycle mirror because you never know when somebody's going to sneak up behind you. So I'll get you a bicycle mirror.
Thank you, Dr. Robbins.
So when I meet students across campus, I ask them 4 questions. What's your name? What year are you? What are you majoring in? Where'd you go to high school? And the last thing I get to is, why did you choose the University of Arizona? Well, I came to study astronomy or whatever it is, right? The weather's so beautiful, the campus is so beautiful, I love the environment. When it gets down to it, oh, by the way, you gave me the most money. And we don't use the D word, we use investment. We invest a lot of money.
If you use the D word around here, you get kicked out of the meeting.
I know, I'm not using the D word. So
Discount.
we invest almost every penny we get from the state, we invest in our students. And you invest twice as much as us. So that's a big issue to attract these students. As Casey, I think that's what she was alluding to. I can't see you, Casey.
Just to be clear.
I can see you up on the screen there, but I see you now.
Just to be clear on the edification of why the word D, discount, the discount word is not applicable in any of our conversations. We pay all those tuitions. Yeah, we pay them. There's money that must come from one account to pay the tuition for that student. There is no discount.
Free.
Yeah. No, meaning there's not like a, we'll take less.
Right.
It has to be paid within the system for the system to work, so.
Regent Duval?
Yep, so you've got me wondering, when President Thor, when you talked about giving you more tools in the tuition space.
You gave us some, yeah.
Yes, to chase the market that you wanted. And then this realization that we have the same GPA requirement for out of state. If our strategic goal, driven by following the money, is to find as many tools to either add or barriers to subtract from your arsenal, is the GPA requirement something we should explore? Now, I realize that with a lower GPA comes probably, presumably, lower SATs. That's going to impact ratings. There's going to be a qualitative trade-off there. I get that. But if we're talking about sustainability and cash flow, should we explore expanding the marketing of our offering to more out-of-state students at lower GPAs who can self-pay?
I would at the one school that you've made that decision to move in that direction, because given the campus and the configuration of NAU and the location in Flagstaff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's unbelievable, because now you're talking about you're getting into these much larger percentages of the population. If you did that for either of us, then that would become a noted separation from the others that we're competing against. And it is the case that there is evidence, if you broaden NAU's ability to take the 2.5% or 2.5 GPA out of state and in state, because of the quality of the institution, it would become within that broader, more accessible market, one of the leading institutions nationally almost immediately.
But you would not apply it
already has.
to you too?
I wouldn't.
Yeah. You would think that not helpful in your two cases?
I don't think it would be helpful, but especially if we go back, see, we're toggling between things here.
Yes,
If
sir.
we're going back to the higher attainment AAU-type universities that we are, I think that would be a mistake. I can ask my data analyst to look this up, but I think we're probably an outlier. I'm trying to think of which state has as many out-of-state students as Arizona does.
Well, New Hampshire, Vermont.
Well, all right.
Small live free or die states.
Yeah.
But of the big live free or
Go
die
industry
states,
And they don't stay, and they're
Arizona's the
expected
one.
to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Texas and Georgia have the rule. It's almost impossible to get into University of Florida out of state.
95% in-state.
And they have very low tuition. Base tuition is
have
like
state support.
$7,000.
UCLA, UC Berkeley have very low in
And
out
we
of state.
had an out-of-state cap until
Yes.
not 2005 or 6, something like that.
What, 15?
What was it, 2015?
Well,
They have it again.
yeah, it was 15, 16 when we
Okay.
got rid of
Well,
the cap.
one of my children went to one of those schools in 2017 because she wouldn't go here because she didn't want to demonstrate out in front of my office.
Well, that was nice of her.
Just a giver.
President Cruz Rivera, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we are more than ready, willing, and able to take on that mission for the state of Arizona. And we've demonstrated that over the last couple of years in terms of our differentiated admissions policies and financial aid programs. Right now, we have 72% of our students are Arizona residents, so it's a 70 to 28% ratio there. We are, as you all know, working very closely with our community colleges to expand opportunity even more. So if they're not ready for NAU with their current GPA, start at our community college partner and then transfer when you're ready. The only thing I would say is as we're following the money, the limit to what NAU can do in expanding its footprint for low-income students and high potential, but perhaps not quite ready students academically, is our ethical responsibility to ensure that they have the support they need to succeed. And that costs money. And so as we think about mission differentiation, I think we need to think about how differentiated revenue streams coming to the system, not just to the universities, are then reallocated in a way that will maintain the integrity of the tri-university mission. And so just putting that on the table as we move forward. I know that we each have our base budgets and we get incremental allocations from the state, but wherever there is discretion on the part of the board to allocate system-wide dollars, I think it needs to recognize that this mission differentiation needs resource allocation differentiation as well.
One of our most painful lessons that we learned at ASU repeatedly, and Vice President Hopkins understands this, and Provost Gonzalez understands this, and Executive Vice President Olson understands this, and that is you can't do enrollment-related things slowly or incrementally because they take years to implement. So if you make an enrollment decision about a grade point average or something like that, and you sort of inch your way into it, it will be many years before you see the impact. So if you spend 2 years pondering it, and you think you're going to get some, you're going to guide that bobsled going down the track a little bit, you can't do that. So I would argue to the board relative to these kinds of things, make a decision and then implement it. Now, you can then implement it on a certain schedule or what have you, but so the board in this open forum that the chair has asked to have, I mean, very hesitant on certain things about the NAU new grade point requirements. And so that means then, well, they're not in place for next year. So here's a shocker. So Kent, correct me if I'm wrong, but 80% of our on-campus first-year applications for undergraduates done by November 30th. Is that about right?
Correct.
So November 30th, a few weeks from now, done. And so if we want to change something, too late now for the class for next year. So it's really the class for the fall of 25. And so it's this pain of this process, and it's just unbelievable. And so we need to make these decisions or not.
Just out of curiosity, so Bobby, when we were talking about the out-of-state and international students, what about something like a USC type of international setup? Is that functional at U of A? I mean, USC is very tricky, yes, well, private, first of all.
Private, and they got lots of money.
Right.
They charge a lot.
So I guess the question is
The
there?
quarterback makes $4 million a year.
The quarterback?
Yeah, he makes Wendy's commercials.
And now he's going to make even more because he's on Wendy's, Dr. Pepper, and one other national commercial.
NIL.
Yeah, so it just isn't even a viable
Well, I
comparison.
mean, I'm not familiar. Keep going. What are they doing differently? I'm not familiar with what USC's doing internationally.
Big international.
They're big.
It's like out of state, don't it's
Yeah.
international.
Yeah. A lot of the UC schools have very large, right, international populations, so focusing more on international versus out of state. Yeah.
We have
yeah.
more international students than any public
Right.
university in the United States.
Yeah.
But and then there's only 4 privates that have more than we do. USC is one of them. Columbia is one of them. I think Boston University is one of them. And so those are strategies. So this real strategy at USC is an elite undergraduate honors college, and then massive graduate students. I mean, so there's a whole thing about the numbers of graduate students at our institutions are probably, we think they're below where we need to be.
Way below.
Should be
bigger. But we're trying. I mean, just believe me, we're trying. Dr. Jenny Lee's here, who heads up our international effort, and, we try to.
And I don't know what draws an international student here. I mean, is it a ranking? Is it a prestige?
It's a school.
So that's kind of, it feeds back into that. Do we need an institution that shows up prominently to grab the attention of not only the out-of-state, but the international students who actually pay more than the out-of-state students do?
So just to riff on my earlier comment, many of us are of a certain age that we talked our retirement plans really often. And you remember the little portfolio diagrams I like to show you? And I would urge you to think in that way so that, there's not just one or two solutions here, but that we're sort of filling out the space. And it might be that you need the elite / international / out of state, as well as the, the schools for those who aren't, who are
I think
very
there's
domestic.
there's no question in my mind we do.
Triangulate all those things, and then everyone has a different role in whatever that system is.
So let me just comment on graduate students. So the flexibility that you've just given us in tuition setting. So it was the stated policy of several boards ago that we could advance market tuition for graduate students. But the political pressure of tuition setting processes in the foras that we've had made that difficult. And so while we should have obviously, hugely discounted tuition for in-state graduate students, we need to be able to reasonably within market conditions advance those tuitions to market status. Our mission is focused on undergraduate education relative to as close to free as possible for undergraduate students. That's the stated constitutional requirement which we live up to. And so the one aspect for the board would be to, as you've depoliticized to some extent the tuition setting process, to continue to maintain that, because that will allow us to now adjust the tuition as needed to get the market value that USC or Boston University or NYU or Columbia or the other big privates that have very large numbers of international students, and so graduate students in particular, which we have also. But you've given us, so the point to your design question is the more flexibility you give to the universities to operate, the better able we are to be agile in very complicated marketplaces. Very complicated.
And I think the international market, too, is dependent on relationships in the market. I mean, I think we probably all get the most international students from China.
We're no longer for us. We're now India.
Just want to add.
Like most of India is moving to Phoenix.
Food is good.
Just want to add a point on the resources needed for a university like NAU to serve more broadly the people of Arizona. It's not even only once they're accepted and what supports they need. To the earlier points that Michael and Bobby were making, it's even getting them to enroll. It's the yield. It's the closing of the deal.
Once they've been admitted, yeah.
And once they've been admitted, there's clearly some cost there. But what we've seen at NAU is that even though with the support of this board, we have clarified the admissions requirement to be more transparent and make sure that more people feel that they can in fact get access to a high quality education at NAU, our GPA year over year continues to go up of those students that actually enroll. So it's not just saying that you are admitted, it's then coming up with the investments that are needed so that they can in fact join the university, take this opportunity, and then of course us having the supports they need to move forward. So it's a costly proposition to be able to deliver on the promise of broadening participation And
This point is unbelievably important, and it's unbelievably powerfully and negatively impactful on us also. So massive applications, massive admissions, and less than what we would like in terms of yield. And I don't mean yield, forget yield, it has to, so our weighted GPA has gone up dramatically for our incoming first-year class. It's 3.93 now. And so what's happening is that there is something else going on in what's happening in terms of the perception of the university or our programs or what have you, but the place where we need the greatest flexibility is in the execution of the financial aid interactions at the time of decision-making. And then what's one other lesson that we just learned this year relative to interactions with students from working class families, Kent? This is a very serious lesson for us.
It's really important to stay focused on their needs. What we probably did is we over-communicated and we confused things. From, will you be living on campus? You haven't registered for classes. Do you
have to
what
make a
type of
decision by this
assistance do you
day.
need? Those things can become overwhelming to a student as he or she is getting ready to make that final decision. And I would also say that in years past, especially for high school students making these decisions, there was this May 1 National Candidate Response Date that's very non-binding. That really isn't followed anymore. Students are making decisions after the end of their high school year, June 1, and in some cases, we saw the month of July. Students were pivoting and heading elsewhere. It's getting pretty fuzzy out there because we're competing for the same type of student.
But the fuzziness, most of the rhetoric that's in the national magazines and newspapers isn't accurately portraying what's actually going on. It's more of our ability to be agile, to be engaged, to be individual. And so these are things that we've taken on very, very seriously in our rethinking of where we're going relative to next year.
Do the work for 'em.
Are there any final comments, questions from the board, from the presidents, from?
I just have one.
Jane?
And this is really just a fun one. Keying off of Michael Crow's statement about enrollment managers and how long the cycle takes, I would argue that you give them the same contracts you give your basketball coaches.
Be like a mafia boss and make them an offer they can't refuse.
That's right. Keep them. You've got three very good
I
ones.
can only deal with one athlete.
Well, what they're describing is a transfer portal.
Lock them in. You commit, you're here
Oh,
for
man.
2 years.
Well, I appreciate it. This is, I'm really pleased with the way this went today. I'm sorry, who else? Regent Reese.
Oh, thank you, Chair.
Yes,
I'm not
sorry.
sure this is the best comment to end on, but I had a lot of time to listen and think on all the different things you had talked about and what everyone spoke on. And I definitely feel like it was a very productive conversation, and I wanted to be able to offer my input like before the end of the meeting. And I guess one thing that I think was emphasized is the importance of having different offerings. And I can only really speak to my experience as a student. And personally, as a student who is from Arizona and attended public schools here in Arizona my whole life and was I'm very academically motivated, I definitely felt like there was a time when I was considering where I wanted to attend school, that there was a missing opportunity to have a more selective institution. And I think that through my position as student regent, I've realized how there are different, priorities that we need to focus on beyond just having a more, institution with a more quality brand, if that's what we're calling it. But I think that could have an interesting impact on the other universities as well, because having a university that has a higher brand like that could bring more of those headquarters that we were talking about, which I feel like would encourage more students to stay in the state when choosing where they want to go, where they want to have their professional careers and things of that nature. Ultimately, that was just I feel like it's a little bit off timing based on the end of our conversation, but I think that this conversation has been really interesting to hear about everyone's different perspectives, and I think it's a really bright future ahead. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and sorry that I missed your hands. It's very difficult. I need somebody on either side of me to be watching the screens, because I can't, it's hard to focus on this and that, so no personal enmity or anything when I didn't see your hands. But I'm really pleased with the way this went. I wasn't quite sure how how it would flow, but I really appreciate everybody's candor and thoughts on this. We will have a different main topic for the next committee meeting, but we will come back with some additional kind of thoughts and ideas or conversations around this. So if there's something that you feel didn't get said, please feel free to either communicate it with me or communicate it with John, and we will move forward from there. But again, thank you so much to everybody for openly participating. I think that makes these much more valuable. So we are now, I'm going to turn it over to Regent Mata for the University Governance and Operations Committee.